Hey guys, I'm Keith Foskey, and this is Theology from a Golf Cart. So the first episode went really well. Many of you gave some really good feedback, and I'm thankful for that. Some of you said that it was a little hard to hear, so I'm wearing my Rode microphone today, and I'm in better light, so hopefully it'll look a little bit better than it did the other day. Some of you also made mention of a little bit of concern for my safety, said, hey, you're driving around, that's a little dangerous. I am, but I am driving on a safe road. I have my street legal golf cart, which has seat belts, it has turn signals, has all of those things. And somebody else asked, well, why are you doing this? It just seems weird. Why not just do this from the studio? Well, the reason why I'm doing theology from a golf cart is because it's sort of reminiscent of something that I had growing up with my dad. When I was a kid, anytime my dad wanted to have a conversation with me about something serious, we would go for a ride together. And we must have spent thousands of hours in the car just talking. And so that's what this is intended to be. This is intended to be basically like a car ride with me, but instead of riding in my car, we're riding on my wife's golf cart. And yes, some of you have pointed out, this is her golf cart. Yes, I am aware. I bought this for her as a Christmas gift, but it's still something that I can use to make videos and have fun and get out and get a little bit of fresh air and have this conversation. So that's why I'm doing it. And today I'm a little nervous, if you want me to be honest. I'm a little nervous because I'm going to be talking about a subject that I know is very controversial. It's a subject that divides people, sometimes viciously, across many lines. And I'm not that type of guy. I mean, I take strong stances, and sometimes I'm very bold in the things that I say. And always with the gospel, I want to be firm and clear and not give an inch. But on other issues like this, which I consider a tertiary issue, one which people can disagree on and still even be possibly even in the same church, this is an issue which I would encourage you, while please hold strong opinions if you have them, please share them in the comments if you would like, but also please be kind and generous to those who disagree with you, because I do believe that this is a conversation, while important, that we can have differences on, because quite frankly, I think that the text that this is based on is not entirely clear. And this is something I need to mention before even going into this. When we talk about the biblical doctrine of perspicuity, and that means the doctrine of clarity, that the Bible is clear, perspicuity is not something that is all throughout the Bible, meaning the whole Bible is equally as clear. There are some passages that are more clear than others. And therefore, when we talk about the Bible and we ask the question, what does this mean? Oftentimes when we're talking about hermeneutics and we're talking about interpreting Scripture with Scripture, we say we take the clear passages and we use those to interpret the less clear passages. We take those that are very obvious and use them to interpret those that are less obvious. So the issue with the topic that we're going to talk about today is there's really only one passage that addresses this issue. And that leads us to an even bigger problem, and that is, well, we don't really have other passages to compare it to. There are other passages that deal with the principle, but there are not other passages that deal with the specific method of applying the principle that we see in this particular text. And of course, if you read the thumbnail or you saw the title of the video, you know that I'm going to be talking about head coverings. And as I said, I am not excited to talk about this text, but I'm doing it because someone asked me to talk about it, and I'm not ever afraid to answer questions when people ask. But I am going to say this isn't my favorite topic to talk about because, as I said earlier, I think this is a topic where people are sometimes needlessly divisive. Now, when I say needlessly, I'm not trying to apply or ascribe motive or anything like that. I don't think we need to be divisive over this. I think we can disagree on this and still be wonderful brothers and sisters in Christ. So what is the issue at hand? The issue at hand is the question of whether or not women in the church are commanded to wear some type of physical covering on their head as a demonstration of their submission, specifically their submission to their husbands. So that's the question, and it's based, as many of you know who know this passage, it's based on 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where Paul, in speaking to the Corinthians, he says that a man is not to pray or prophesy with his head covered, and that a woman is to pray or prophesy with her head covered. And he goes on to talk about how the hair itself is given to woman as a cover, and that's how nature demonstrates this as a reality. And so that a woman shouldn't shave her head, and if she's going to uncover her head, then she should shave her head. So there's a lot in the passage that has to be interpreted and understood. And of course, sitting here in a golf cart, I'm not going to be giving an exegesis of this passage. I'm just giving some ideas and thoughts. And again, there are many people who take very strong opinions on this. I am not a person that demands that women cover their head in worship. I know that there are some churches that do, and they use this passage as the major passage for making that argument. But that's not where our church is. That's not what our church teaches. And so I'm going to give you some thoughts as to why we don't. And then I'm going to allow you guys to just discuss it in the comments. You're going to have some ideas of your own. You're going to have some thoughts of your own. You may even have some further questions that you want me to dig into, and I'm happy to do that. Just like I said, let's interact, but let's be godly and let's be kind as we are interacting with each other. So there's essentially 4 ways that this passage has been understood and applied within churches. There are those that say that this is dealing with a principle and a custom, which neither of which is still to be applied today. The principle is the principle of male headship, and the custom is that male headship was demonstrated by a woman wearing a head covering. And some people would say both of those are no longer to be observed. Men and women are absolutely equal today, and there's no male headship. Well, I don't agree with that one, but that is one that is at least should be mentioned, because there are those who believe it. That's not my position, but there are those who believe it. But again, it brings up the twofold part of this, and that is that we're dealing with something that was a physical practice, a custom, but also a principle. And therein comes the second way of understanding this passage, and that is the principle is for all time, but the custom is not for all time. And that would be more in line with where I would be. And then the third view would be that the principle is for all time and the custom is for all time, and therefore a woman should continue to wear a head covering as a demonstration of her submission to her husband, and that is the way that this should be practiced, that women should wear head coverings while in worship. Now, there's a fourth perspective that I think should be understood, and I respect it a lot. I think it's a valuable perspective. There's a video on this from Apologia Utah, where the pastor there, I don't know him personally, but he did a good video on it, where he talked about the fact that what's often overlooked is that it says praying and prophesying. And so he references the fact that he believes that this is actually referring to the practice of prayer and prophecy, which was given in the early church to men and women, and that this was a way that women who prophesied in the early church, women who did that, were still demonstrating their submission to their husbands and their submission under Christ by wearing head coverings. And since we no longer have that gift of prophecy being exercised in the church, that's something that with that gift going away, the head coverings go away. Now, of course, there would be disagreements between those who are continuationists who would say that gift didn't go away, and so that leads to a whole other sort of opening of a can of worms there. But as I said, I want to give credit where credit is due. I liked his explanation, and I want to dive a little further into it as time goes on. But ultimately, I would say it's worth considering that there are 4 different perspectives. There's the perspective that the principle and the custom are both outdated, that the principle is eternal, but the custom is not. That would be the position I would hold. And then there's the position that the principle and the custom continue eternally or ongoing until now, and therefore men and women should wear head coverings, and that is that third position. And the fourth position, as I said, would be that 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 of the position of the pastor of Apologia Utah, who said it was only for the time where there was prayer and prophecy happening within the church. Hello. It was only for the time when prayer and prophecy was happening within the church and with women, and since that gifting has ceased, that no longer continues. All right, so let me get back to, I said what my position is. I believe that we're talking about a principle where Paul is using a custom to describe a principle, but that the custom no longer is for us. And here's essentially my reasoning, and some of you may disagree. I know some of you are going to disagree. Some of you are going to want to share your opinion, and that's fine. That's what I'm asking you for. But here is how this works out. One, the custom that Paul is speaking about, there's a lot of different debate. When I was teaching through 1 Corinthians, I was preaching through 1 Corinthians, as some have noted, you could read 10 commentaries on 1 Corinthians and you would get 10 different reasons why the head coverings were or were not being used. And some would say it was because the head covering was a way for the Christian women to distinguish themselves from the women in the prostitutes. Of course, Corinth was a place that was filled with people who lived licentious and lustful and sinful lifestyles. And so they said the head coverings was a way of separating themselves from the women who didn't cover themselves, which were often the prostitutes. And so some commentators would argue that that was the reason for the head coverings, and therefore that was the customary reason. Others say it was related to them being married, that the head covering was a symbol of being married and in submission to their husband, and that relates to some of what Paul says here. But again, it's not entirely clear in the text what the head covering even is. There are some who believe the hair is a form of covering, and therefore as long as a woman has hair, then she's covering herself according to the standard. I'm not sure that I would agree with that. In fact, I don't really think I agree with that. That's just one way of reading the text that some people have taken. But again, this is where I'm coming to the point where I think this text is not, it's not as clear as some other passages, and therefore we're having to make conclusions drawn from not only what the text says, but also what history says and what culture has said. And all of this comes together to cause us to have to really make some conclusions here. And that's my question. That's always my question. When somebody comes to me and says, I do this, or I do that, or I believe this, or I believe that, I always say, how did you come to your conclusion? How did you get where you are? Okay, how did you get to your conclusion? So here's how I'm getting to my conclusion. I believe that this particular text is a difficult text because it's the only text in the New Testament that specifically addresses this particular practice in this way. But it's not the only text that deals with the principle. The principle of headship from husband to wife is throughout the New Testament. We see this in several other places, but head covering is not mentioned in those other texts. And so we don't have anything to compare it to. We don't have an absolute understanding of what the head covering was. And this is somewhat, I think, interesting to consider when we think about how head coverings are practiced today. If my wife wore a clip in her hair and she said, "This is my symbol of my husband's authority and my submission," would that be enough? I don't know if it would be enough for some people. Some people might say, "Well, that's just not enough of a covering." Okay, well, some people wear doilies, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It just looks like a doily, and it's on the head with hairpins. Okay. That's enough. Okay, well, what about someone who says, no, we have to wear something that covers all the way down to our shoulders? And then those who would argue, well, no, there has to be something that covers all the way past the shoulders. And again, this becomes an issue of debate as to what's on the head and what is it intending to convey. And this is where I want to get to, again, how I'm coming to my conclusion. In the city of Corinth, in the first century, the head covering conveyed something. It was culturally conveying a truth. Paul says that what it was conveying, it was conveying that submission. It was conveying that authority and submission to authority. He also says it's for the angels, and I still honestly could say I struggle with the meaning of that, and there's a lot of debate about what that means. And as I was preaching through it, I remember saying this is kind of difficult. So I think that when we discuss the subject of the culture, okay, there's a cultural mandate here in Corinth during the life of Paul where he says this is what is supposed to happen and this is what is supposed to be done. I don't know that I can say for certain that that cultural mandate was meant for all time. And therefore, I can't bind someone else's conscience and say, you have to do this, because I don't believe, and I'm not certain that that's what Paul was intending to mean. However, I do believe there's a principle that underlies it, and that principle is the principle of submission. Wives are to submit to their husbands as unto the Lord. That is something that I preach, that is something that I teach, because that is something the Bible clearly teaches throughout the New Testament, not only from the Apostle Paul, but throughout the other books of the New Testament. We read, it's not a single passage, it's throughout the New Testament. And so I can say that, and I can say, and in the first century, here is this example. Now, what would be an example today of submission to a husband? Is it head covering? I don't think so. I don't think that that's the way that that's demonstrated today. I don't know if you can hear it right now, but there's a jet going overhead. That's pretty loud. I may have to cut this part of the video out. Now, I understand that there are those who absolutely hate the position that I'm trying to argue for, and that is that it's a cultural example with a principle that lasts eternally, that the principle of headship, the principle of authority and submission is there, but that the cultural example does not last forever. And one of the arguments that's often used is the argument regarding the fact that head coverings were pretty standard up until about 150 years ago. And the argument usually goes something like this: well, with the advent of feminism and with the advent of the throwing off of male authority and male headship, so too went the head coverings. I'm not certain that that's true. And here's my sort of pushback against that argument. And that is this: cultures have differed. And the head covering of a woman I don't think has had ubiquitous cultural practice. Christianity has been in different cultures all around the world. And to make the argument that this has been the universal practice of the church, we would have to look through the cultures of the various times through history that these things have been practiced. And I know a lot of you immediately your head's about to explode because you're like, well, I've seen it in this church, I've seen it in that church, I've seen it in various places around the world. Yes, I understand. But again, was it because of what the Bible taught, or was it because it was the culture? I do believe this was pretty standard in the culture, especially in the ancient world, that women would wear head coverings. But also in many cultures, women wear veils where they cover their face. I have yet to see a church where they commanded that women cover their faces. I don't think that that's practiced. I would hope it wasn't practiced, because that's certainly not something that can be taken out of the 1 Corinthians 11 text. So again, these are all thoughts that I'm having. These are all, again, somebody asked me this question, I wanted to address it. I'm going to link to my sermon where I preached on this text. I'm going to link it in the comments below. And I'm going to encourage you, if you want to hear more about what I have to say on this subject, go there. Because one of the things I did point out in the sermon, this is where I'm going to draw to a conclusion, is no matter how we understand head coverings, and certainly some of us are going to differ on this subject, but no matter how we understand head coverings, we should understand this. Within the body of Christ, there should be a distinction between men and women. And when I was preaching on this text, I said one thing this text certainly would cause us to at least conclude is that cross-dressing is wrong, is that women should look like women and men should look like men. Culturally, that's different. How men and women dress in different cultures is different. The missionary that our church supports goes to a people in Indonesia. Certainly their culture differs from the American culture in dress and how women present themselves and things like that. But women should look like women and men should look like men. And where there's confusion about who's a man and who's a woman, that's a big problem. And if nothing else can be drawn, we certainly can reach that conclusion. So that's a thought to consider as well. But again, I really look forward to the interaction with this post. I hope no one takes this in an ugly or nasty way. I understand there are those of you who have really strong opinions about this, and I hope you share those opinions. But again, I hope you share it with kindness and understand that for those of us who disagree, we're all trying to serve Christ. We're all trying to do what we think is right. We're all trying to seek to understand the text and apply what it says in the best way we can. And if we can just do that together and be godly toward one another, I think that would be great. So again, thank you for watching this episode of Theology from a Golf Cart. And if you're enjoying this, please let me know in the comments and subscribe to the channel. That's a big help. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down button twice.